If you've ever moved an alocasia from soil to leca, you probably know what usually happens. The plant looks fine at first, maybe even great, but within a few days or weeks, the leaves start to yellow, one by one, until there's nothing left, they all drop off. Base case scenario, you're left with a bare stick and some roots, just hoping it will grow back, and eventually it might, but the beautiful plant you started with, that's gone. This happens so often that most of us have come to accept that it's part of the process. But what if it doesn't have to be that way? Today, I'm trying something completely different, a method that goes against everything we've been told about moving plants into semi-hydroponics. No root washing, no soaking. It's unorthodox, it's risky, but if it works, it could be the gentlest way to transition alocasias without losing all of those precious leaves. And I'm not just setting it up and sending you off. I'll be showing you updates today in this video so you can see exactly what happens over the next few weeks. Alocasias hate root disturbance and they show it. Even if the roots survive a full wash, the plant often goes into shutdown mode. It stops taking up water, drops its leaves, and sulks for weeks. That's the part I'm hoping to change. I'm testing a new approach that's less stressful, less extreme, and yes, a little controversial. It breaks some of the rules of leca, and it's not what I usually do. But if it helps the plant hold on to its leaves and avoid that typical crash, it might be worth rethinking what I've always done. For this test, I'm using two Alocasia Maharanis. They're small but healthy with strong roots and just the right size for trying out this method without too much risk. Both these plants were sent to me by Uprooted, and as always, they arrived in perfect condition, well packed, no leaf damage, and ready to go straight into a new setup. If you're based in Australia and looking for quality indoor plants online, Uprooted is one of the shops I consistently trust. They ship Australia-wide, and I have never had a bad experience with them. I'll leave a link to their store in the description if you want to check them out. Now, this isn't a formal experiment. I'm not doing a side-by-side comparison with a control group or anything like that. This is really about trialing a different way to transition alocasias into leca and seeing how that goes. I'll be treating both plants exactly the same, using the same pots, the same light, the same nutrient solution, and observing how they respond over time. Here's what I'm using. Some pre-rinsed, pre-soaked leca, some slotted nursery pots with ventilation, and these will have cache pots as well. I'm also using a basic nutrient solution made up of Clonix clone solution and a root zone. Now, let's get into the setup. I've already washed and soaked the leca before use. If you're not sure how to do that, I've linked a full video above and in the description where I show you exactly how to wash leca straight out of the bag and get it ready for planting. Now let's get the plants prepped. I start by gently squeezing the sides of the nursery pot to loosen the root ball, and then I tip the plant out slowly, supporting it so it doesn't put any pressure on the roots. The goal here isn't to clean the roots completely, it's to disturb them as little as possible. I give the root ball a few light shakes, like so, and whatever soil comes off easily comes off. I am not pulling at the roots or teasing them apart. I'm not rinsing anything. What stays on, and I'll just pot it up as is. But before I do that, I look around to see if I can find any corms in and amongst that organic matter and soil. Okay, there's nothing there, and that is the kind of root system that I am working with. That is what my plants look like. For this next step, I'll grab my slotted pots. These pots have got ventilation along the sides, and I really love them because they're not your typical 14 centimeter pot. These are a little bit longer than the pots I normally use, and you will see why a little bit later in the video that is useful. Now, one of the things I've talked about in previous videos is how I like to use wicks when I'm growing my alocasias. So I am going to put my wicks in my pot, just threading that through my nursery pot there, and I'll thread that through on the other side as well. So I've got my wick in place and you can see it over there. I'll do it for my other pot. I've got a lot of wicks. I don't need that many. I thought I was actually going to have to do 4 plants, but I only had 2. So there we go. It does get a little bit fiddly putting these wicks through, but yeah, got it. Okay. Put that in, and those are my wicks ready. I'll now grab my leca and put leca in that nursery pot. So I've got my wick here. I'll just hold on to my wick as I put my leca in because I want my wick to sit at the top. There we go. So it's mixed in with my leca. And I have covered my wick there. I'll do the same thing with the other pot. Okay, this is where we are now. What I'm now going to do is put my plants into those pots, and I'll just put them at the top there, and I like that level. That is a great level. So you can see that leca is going just almost half of that pot, which is fine. That's totally fine for what I'm trying to do. And I'll just fill that pot up with leca. And I'll do the same thing with the other plant. Looking at this plant, actually, this one has got, there's this one leaf that's come off that was, you can see it's yellowing. That was going to come off anyway. And there's this other one here. It's quite scraggly. I just pull that off. I don't need it. And I get it as is and I plonk it on top of my leca and I just fill the rest of that pot up with leca. Okay, so as you can see, my plants do look quite deep in that pot. So I want to pull them up just a little bit. There we go, because I don't want it buried too deep in there. This one looks like it could do with more leca. There we go. Pull them up a little bit and just squeeze those pots a bit just to allow that leca to settle within that pot. Give it a little bang and I can fill that up a little bit more. So as you can see, our plant starts about there. There are no alocasia roots at the bottom there. Same thing with this one. You can see it's there. So, which is exactly what we're looking for. We don't want that soil and organic matter to be in contact with the reservoir at the bottom. So let us do the next thing. Okay, next I'll show you how I water and manage the shallow reservoir for these plants, because that's what's really, really important in helping this transition, or at least that's what I believe anyway, because of course this is an experiment. So I've got my plants completely potted up there and I've got them on my little dish. So once they're potted up, I water from the top. I am watering from the top. Exactly what you would do when you are watering your plant that's living in soil. That's exactly what happens. And as you can see, that nutrient solution seeps through and comes out. And you can see there's actually a lot of soil material that's coming out as I do that, which is fantastic. So what this accomplishes is, one, those roots of this plant have actually been moistened. At this point, it gives the roots immediate access to moisture and nutrients without needing to rely on the capillary action of the leca. And it's really important here because those plants were actually a little bit dry when I put them in there. So that first top watering achieves that, but it also removes some of that soil and organic matter in a much gentler way. So I'm now going to put these pots in a very, very shallow reservoirs. If I can find, where did I put my reservoirs? Oh my goodness, here. I got my reservoirs. These are the reservoirs that I'm using. Now, I wanted to use this dish initially just to show you as well the level of the reservoir that I'm going to be putting. It's going to be very, very shallow, no more than 2 centimeters. So it's going to be no more than up that way because of that organic matter and soil that's still up there. So I don't want any of that having access to the reservoir. And what I'm then going to be doing is every week I am going to be flushing these plants. I will flush them every week. And at that flush, that soil and organic matter is going to come off. But what's happening there as well is the roots are settling into the leca. So in my mind, it's a kind of gentle transition. I don't know if it's really going to work, but that's kind of what I'm trying. And I'm really optimistic. And I think it is going to work, but we will have to see. So that's my nutrient solution there. I put that in the reservoir just a little bit. And every week I'll be flushing that. Now that both plants are set up, here's what I'll be watching for over the next few weeks. The biggest thing I'm hoping for is leaf retention. If these alocasias can hold on to most or even all of their existing leaves, that alone would be a huge win, because normally, even with the best intentions, it's almost guaranteed that the plant will drop most of its leaves and start from scratch. I'll also be watching for signs of root growth, hence why I'm using the clear pots. So it'll be very easy for me to see what's happening within that pot. And I'll also be looking at just overall plant stability. I'm not expecting explosive new growth right away. That's not my goal. The focus is on whether the plant can adjust quietly without a dramatic decline. And of course, I'll be keeping an eye out for any problems, yellowing or mushy leaves, signs of rot or root collapse, algae, unwanted smells, or other signs that the leftover soil is causing issues. If I start seeing any of that, I'll reassess. And of course, you'll be there for all of it. But the hope is that with careful flushing and a shallow reservoir, any remaining soil will gradually clear off without causing any trouble. It's been 10 days since I moved these alocasias straight into leca without rinsing off the roots. And I've got to say, they're looking excellent. No yellowing, no leaf loss, no stress signs. The leaves still look and feel amazing, which is already a big win compared to some of my past transitions. At this stage, I'm not seeing obvious new root growth yet, but that's normal. It's only been 10 days. It's still early. I won't take the plants out of the pots just yet. I want to leave them undisturbed, but I will give them a good slow flush today. The idea is to try and wash out more of the leftover soil and organic matter still clinging to the roots. You might even see some of those coming out during the flush. Now that I've flushed them and they've been through that 10 days, I will keep regularly flushing them, probably every week or so, and I'll continue using Clonix Clone solution until I spot new roots inside the pot. Once that happens, I'll switch over to foliage focus, and that's going to support a leaf and stem growth. So far, this method is off to a really promising start, but I'm not calling it a success just yet. The real test is still to come. Whether the plants continue to hold their leaves, push out new growth, or show any signs of decline will tell us a lot over the next few weeks. If this approach reduces stress and leaf loss, it could be a game changer for anyone struggling to move alocasia into semi-hydroponics. Let me know in the comments if you've tried something similar or if this is something you'd consider testing with your own plants. And if you found this helpful, give it a like and stick around. I've got more videos coming up, especially if you're experimenting with leca or transitioning trickier plants. I'll see you there.